I'm Craig Facey, and I'm here to talk to you today about operationalizing Milton Erickson's hypnosis through a formulaic flowchart, delineating a structured series of steps. You see, even his own daughter criticized him for having missed details in his case studies that clinicians would have had valuable learning in knowing, wherein people observed that he did not adequately illustrate his assessment or metaphor generation strategies. He preferred to narrate a teaching story, concealing some aspects of what he was discussing, which became a major point of criticism against his approach. Erikson has bestowed upon us a plethora of strategies, such as methods to incorporate humour, truisms, ordeal therapy, and numerous other techniques that employ congruent metaphors during waking hypnosis. You see, all communication involves a mild form of waking hypnosis. Even being engaged in making this video places me in a mild trance-like state, and I hope it may be engaging enough to sufficiently induce a similar state in you. In this video, we'll primarily focus on waking hypnosis though, and metaphor generation during our demonstration, as exploring further trance depths warrants another level of training. Milton Erickson's approach to hypnosis encompasses 7 stages, although in this demonstration I'm adding a preliminary step 0, which encompasses assessment, effectively making it an 8-step process. Essentially, there are 3 vital phases of therapy that are indispensable for all clinicians to master. Ongoing assessment forms the first step, followed by adapting evidence-based practices to individualize the approach for each client as a second step. The third and crucial phase involves integrating this adapted strategy into the person's daily life. Otherwise, we run the risk of merely highlighting their shortcomings in the first stage and prescribing remedies for what they should do in the second stage without offering tangible solutions. The reality is that the strategies will only prove effective if we establish daily rituals to unlearn old habits and foster our best selves. Let's take a moment to examine the 8 stages of Erikson's approach before we delve deeper inside into the in-depth application of these stages.
Milton Erikson's matching metaphors, the stages. First of all, his assessments were very systemic. Think of looking at not just the mind and the thoughts of the person and their daily behaviours, but how they interacted with the people in their home and their work, their wider social circles, their bigger family, the wider community. He's really trying to look into what is it that people are actually doing when they say, I did not much, I did nothing. He's taking all of that information on board so that he can engage with the person deeply and to start to work towards finding a metaphor to match, a story that will resonate with the person. So in the induction, he's really bypassing the critical faculty, the capacity of the person to criticize, listen to something else in their mind. He's telling an engaging story often, or some other strategy, of which he has many, to really get the person on board and connected with where he's going with that metaphor. As he's matching the metaphor, the way this presentation is laid out, it makes out as if he's just done that assessment, he's engaged with the person, and bam, he comes up with a metaphor. Though it was iterative, he may adjust the metaphor, come up with another metaphor. And there's also often a metaphor brought in that has some universal truisms and some capacity for him to adjust the story. And we see many examples of this throughout the text written about Milton Erickson, that some of the metaphors he used were stories about his own life, and the way he told them one time to another differed based on the client. It's even been suggested with some of the stories that those things may not have even have happened. He's just put them in there to help the person. These stories often also have an innate quality of accepting that the struggle the person is going through is real. Some normalization within that metaphor. In retrieving resources, he's trying to use the metaphor to find a way to help the person understand that they already have the capacity to work through this, like overcoming the obstacles of not being able to crawl and then to walk. People can achieve so much in their life, and often when they get stuck in a loop of avoidance and safety behaviours and anxieties or depressions, they'll lose those prior capacities that can be rebuilt, just like in the book, The Brain That Changes Itself. In the direct work, he's demonstrating that capacity. He's not only drawing out those resources and similarities to other things people have done, but then explicitly stating that. I wonder how that might apply to your situation when you're able to put these prior skills in place in a new situation, how you've done similarly before. So many of these steps now, from steps 3 onwards, are talking about how he's not just put the metaphor out there. You know, we could all look in these cookbooks, so to speak, of Eriksonian scripts that come up with these great, fascinating stories that we can tell to a client. This is emphasizing that we must find a way to apply that to the client. So what might come up in the future that would remind you of this metaphor and how to put it in place is the kind of thing he's saying after he's said a story. He's getting them to connect with what were the triggers, what are the things you'll expect, and then how you apply that differently given the new information. In ending the matching metaphor, he's doing what we'd call some ego strengthening, going, it's fascinating that the answer's already within you, that you already have this capacity, that is there, and you're going to be able to do this. How wonderful that will be. And in reorienting that, it's like we've talked about, the last thing you say to a client shouldn't be, oh, and good luck with that, because that would be a negative reinforcer, demonstrating to the client that you see difficulties in moving forward. He's wanting to inspire them with hope and remind them to move forward. So making suggestions like, I wonder how this is going to look when you've put those things in place that you've already shown you're able to do, and how that will affect things before I see you next. If those are your last words to the client in that session before the session ends, then you've encouraged the client, and you've also triggered in them the creative thought process to imagine the scenery of what that would look like when they put all those pieces of the puzzle together that you've worked out in the session, so that hopefully they're driving home from the session and imagining, yeah, this is what it will look like when I have those things come up and I know I can do this and this, and I'll put it in place, it'll be great, and I'll tell my therapist about it next time. Fantastic.
In a sense, what we're already doing as therapists trying to implement evidence-based practice is playing a game of chess. We have structures and rules, and we play and adjust those to suit the individual client. Milton Erickson wasn't just playing a game of chess, he was also reading the face of the client and responding to their needs like a masterful poker player. So he was aligning the way he was doing his moves by adding in stories that would resonate with the client, that would inspire them, that would demonstrate to them truisms, that would illustrate his empathy for their situation. There's a famous example of his son who fell over, lost a tooth, and was bleeding a lot and needed some dental surgery. I'd like to illustrate today a similar story that I did with my own child. She slipped off the wharf recently. There was quite a cut on her leg and it looked like it might need stitches. So on pulling her out of the water, I was able to first assess the situation. There's some blood and there were some white patches where flesh had been removed that hadn't bled yet, showing me that this might need stitches. It was salt water, it was cold, it was muddy, things were a mess, and she was going to need a rinse with some warm water before we could get her to the hospital to see if she needed stitches. She's quite young, she was screaming, she was pretty scared, and as she thrashed about, that's probably what cut her leg. So that was my assessment of the situation, done automatically in a second, as a father does while he's pulling her out of the water. Then, in the next stage, induction, I had to engage her with something to distract her from screaming. And so I said, look into my eyes, darling. I'm going to get this cold jacket off you, and then you're going to have my jacket. And I took off my jacket. We peeled the thing off her and put my jacket over her shoulders. And we started to talk about some fun things that we're going to do the next day. We'll get this all cleaned up soon, and we're going to go and do X, Y, Z. Starting to get some engagement there. But I needed to match in a metaphor at this point. A metaphor that would help her to deal with the pain, because I could feel that she was getting quite hysterical. She doesn't like the water, especially salt water, and no one likes to be in pain when they're a small child. And she was quite fearful, not understanding whether she was going to need stitches and not wanting them. So, as we walked to the car, her sibling helped carry the soggy jacket, and I started talking to her about a metaphor matching to her interests. She's a dancer, and we recently saw a movie about a mermaid. So I talked about how the main character in this movie had gained legs, and how they had to go through great pains to do so. And then we talked about how she'd also, through great effort, learnt amazing things, like her dancing skills that she's recently won some awards for. That was retrieving resources. And then we're starting to talk some more, matching her interest and giving more detail, imagining the sights and sounds of what it would be like if she was this mermaid, and what it would be like as she went through the trials and tribulations of learning to walk, and talked about how this could be related back to her life, where she has her mum and her dad to look after her, and a doctor, let's call him Dr. Smith, who she trusts, that could support her on this journey to fixing her legs up again. So we were reorienting, waking up from this procedure to work towards ending that metaphor that was matching her and applying it to her situation, of how through trial and tribulation and focusing on the outcome, she can cope with this. While she was distracted from that, it was then easy to say, how interesting is that while we've been talking about this fun story, your leg hasn't hurt as much. Of course, that then draws her attention back to the leg, and she becomes upset. So we start to talk a bit more about the mermaid, and then talk about what else we're going to do over the weekend, and how cool her next dance competition would be. Digging right into her interests, talking about where we're going to eat, how we're going to get there, all of these details that expand from all five senses, engaging the whole brain, to induce her back into a zone of focus, awakening hypnosis of engagement, and then saying, oh look, each time we think about the positive, we're directed away from the pain and it doesn't hurt as much. God, you're amazingly strong. You'll have the best legs in no time. This was also building in a resource for her that she can use as she went across to have her leg looked at in the hospital to see if they needed stitches. Fortunately, she didn't, and everything's okay. This was then completed with that there saying how good and strong you are, this ego strengthening that directly could lead into me saying, hey, you can do this later too, just like you've done now when it comes up. Of course, you need to look at your pain and make sure everything's safe, and then we can go back to thinking about our best life, our best self, what we want to achieve, what's next, what's fun. So, Milton Erickson's case studies demonstrate so many beautiful techniques that we're not going to go into in this presentation. Some of those involve things like his ordeal therapy, where he would set a homework task for a person, often based on the metaphor, that would give them a challenge to face in life, where they would have to use the skills learnt from the metaphor to be able to implement that. Now, Milton Erickson's method isn't just for clever stories to engage people and distract them from pain. It can be used to implement evidence-based practice, and that's what I'm advocating here for today. That we can use this structure of his model to be able to explain so many things to our clients in a way that resonates with them. There's very little point in my insisting that clients understand my terminology as a psychologist, like body scans, floatbacks, mirroring, parallel processes. I'm just confounding them. And we, as clinicians, need to know this information so that we can structure our work. Though we also need a vehicle through which we can apply this to our clients' lives in a context that makes sense to them, which is what Erikson was trying to do, and that is, I believe, why he was insisting on teaching through stories and examples, because he was also wanting us to implement and apply metaphors and examples. Some of his philosophy was about that our conscious mind has causal links to the unconscious mind. If I'm listening to and hearing words, then my unconscious mind is interested in what is relevant. If I'm focusing on one spot, my brain has its own idea of what needs to be done. So, through all these complexities that are explained thoroughly in many other books, they talk about all these fascinating ideas he's created, like dissociation and time dilation, automatic writing, positive hallucinations, hypermnesia, recalling all of a song suddenly because it was related to some beautiful experience in a person's life. These particular techniques are easily learned, and they're not always included within these metaphorical structures, in this matching metaphor flowcharted steps and stages that I am discussing today. Let's have a look at this worksheet. We've got the assessment phase. Milton Erickson was big on doing a systemic assessment, looking at the person's own mind, their close supports, their home life, their work life, their friends, the wider society. What he was doing there, which is little explained in the text about him, was trying to gain a thorough understanding of the person's worldview so that he could then pick out a match, a metaphor that suited that person. So in this section on assessment, we could be using the magic wand question, which is, if we had a magic wand, what would be different about your life tomorrow? Let's say I waved that now, Shazam, and tomorrow you woke up and everything was different. How would things look different? How would the day start? How would the middle go? What else would happen? He would acquire the history across the systemic domains and look at what their daily routine was how it was unfolding. Who do they routinely interact with? And he would also, it appears in the text, look for the subtleties in those missing time spaces. When they say, oh, no, I did nothing much. They were doing something. What was it? And then in the induction, that could be done through the vehicle of conversation at any time. It can be done through the yes set, the no set, matching language and matching a story. Though it generally had some empathizing parallels once it came into play. Some way of normalizing, accepting the struggle that the person's going through. If someone's in pain, we can't have a metaphor that says pain isn't real because there's only actually temperature receptors and pressure receptors in the body, so pain is therefore constructed by the mind. This is true, neuroscientifically speaking, though it's not going to engage our client. So in the second step of matching metaphor, he would be crafting a captivating metaphor that mirrors the client's problem situation. Mirrors, as in demonstrates acceptance and normalization of such. Then in retrieving the resources, in step 3, this is about employing tangential metaphors that reawaken dominant patterns instrumental in addressing the client's challenges. What do I mean by that? People have so many skills. There are so many truisms that we can easily draw on, like the paper cut. When I get a paper cut, ow, then I often may not see that. I'll keep going about my work until I discover some blood on the page. And many people have had this experience where you look down and go, that hurts. And, you know, you didn't feel the pain until after you looked at it. So, Milton Erickson was a very wise man who'd experienced a lot of things in his life, across classes and social contexts in city and country. He had a fairly broad knowledge of trivia that he could draw on for things like this. And there's a lot of texts out there about Milton Erickson's work that give us a lot of these strategies to demonstrate a lot of these truisms that can be applied in many of our therapeutic sessions. So that's about retrieving resources there. It's a psychoeducation in a sense, but doing it in a palatable means. Because the idea of the paper cut is quite obviously going to be much more acceptable to people than the idea of there not being any other pain than that which is created in our own minds. That's like telling a person, you're wrong, and it's not going to go down well. So these can be people's historical successes, and they provide a justification that is common sense based. Reorienting. This is like once the person has enjoyed the metaphor and seen the wisdom of it, they come right out of it. But first of all, we've got the direct work in ego strengthening. So in ego strengthening, where we are reframing, and it's like the second stage of the 3 phases that is self-evident across all therapeutic modalities. We've done assessment, and say for example in cognitive behavioral therapy, within assessment we identify the negative unhelpful thoughts. In the intervention phase, we formulate the preferred thoughts, and we help people to find ways through behavioral experiments to start to implement those, with the goal in the relapse prevention phase of those preferred thoughts influencing every daily action. So I might say to a client, why don't you imagine each day what your preferred thought is, how that would inspire your day to be different. Like if you were to wake up each morning and look at a piece of paper that says, I am as capable as the effort that I put in a balanced way. Place that on your mirror. Looking at that would be just phase 2. Though, looking at that and imagining how that, like a stone dropped into a pond, would ripple through your day and affect every thought and behavior and word that you say. If I concentrate and focus on that thought each morning and then use a mental imagery to depict how my day might unfold if I have that thought, then I'm practicing the implementation and preventing relapse because I have this very clear strategy that I can go back to. In Milton Erickson's matching metaphors, these metaphors being closely aligned to the person, build in an amazing memory, a story that they'll tell about their therapy session or that they'll hold sacred in their mind. This story is a relapse prevention plan in itself because the client can go back to that as a resource. And in the direct work, he tries to build into the metaphor how it is a truism that a person is able to apply such a technique as this. This might involve time dilation effects or some other strategy within the process so that he can demonstrate to the person that they've already done it. Like I did with my daughter in distracting her and then going, hey, you've already done this. You've been able to overcome your pain by focusing on another thing. And sure, it's going to come back like it is now because I've mentioned it. Let's go on again to that thing you want to do on the weekend. That direct work is building their confidence, demonstrating them that it works, selling the technique. On to step 5, linking resources. We could be saying something like, I wonder how you'll be able to support your other brother and sister if something like this was to happen to them. Or how you'll tell other people like the doctor about what you've done and your incredible strength. Relating this back to my child's other resources in her life allows her the capacity to imagine implementing it in different places. Like the person with the pain and the paper cut, we could say, imagine how this could affect other situations where you have pains that are worth acknowledging but not worth stopping for. If this could be a technique that gives you a warning sign that allows you to slow down, take care of yourself, and turn things onto a path of productivity, what would that mean for your life? And to link resources, what would others say about this? Your partner, your friends, people in the workplace. How would that change the situation? It's like the mental movies technique that I was talking about, where you're imagining implementing this in your daily life. And Milton Erickson was using some techniques there to imagine how that person would be implementing that in their life. Ending the metaphor through ego strengthening in step 6 involves closing the loop on the metaphor and linking it to the individual's elaborate inner world. It's a shift in their perception, saying, that's interesting. I wonder how this will turn out from here. We're challenging them to take a moment. It's often good to leave this as a pregnant pause at the end of the session, to plant that last seed of really curious how the things you've learnt through that metaphor might apply to your situation over the next couple of weeks until we catch up next. Looking forward to hearing about that. Whereas, if we were to end the session with best of luck, we're doing a negative reinforcer to say, oh, maybe things won't work for you. Milton Erickson was very clever in that way in his use of language. It's really hard for us, not being geniuses like him, to be able to implement that. Though, there's structures here. Some wise people have discovered it in these books, and we can draw it together and pull it into modern evidence-based practice. I'd like to share with you another example. When I was a school counsellor, and I was asked by the principal to do a presentation for the new kindergarten class. They'd been in the room for a couple of weeks and there was a lot of social anxieties going on, as is common for kindergarten children, missing their family and their old friends at preschool. So I considered evidence-based practice and thought to myself, that's a little boring for a group of kids who, frankly, have been running around playing for years and now they're being asked to sit still and listen. So that was my assessment of the situation. And then I needed to find a metaphor that would match their experience. I needed to go with the universal truisms, not just an individualized metaphor, because these children had come from different daycares. They wouldn't necessarily all have the same background knowledge. So I chose to tell a story, a new story, that would demonstrate the skills that they might be able to use in a brief, engaging way, because they have short attention spans, speaking from a systemic perspective in terms of their developmental stage. Perhaps I'll just demonstrate. Hi kids, I'm Mr. Fahey, the school psychologist. I'm here today to tell you about something cool I learned when I was a kid to be able to deal with the stress of being at school and being away from everyone. Now, school psychologists can help with this, but you can probably all help each other. I've brought something to show you. Hello, I'm Mr. Bugaloo. Oh, look kids, Mr. Bugaloo is an alien that's come to me, and he's come from this other planet. Where is it again? Oh, it's Rocktopia. Oh, cool, Rocktopia. That sounds like there's a bit of rock and roll going on there. No, not really. We just dance on emotion bubbles. Emotion bubbles? Yes! Emotions bounce through the sky. Oh. Ah. Just like you're a bit floaty now, hey? Yes! Oh, what do emotion bubbles do? They can be scary, and they can be fun, and they can be playful. Okay, so how do you deal with them? Well, we get taught as young children that we can imagine our own bubble, our enjoyable bubble. We might imagine our family, our favorite toys, all in our bubble. But we can't stay in there, we can't hide or miss out on the fun. So we imagine our bubble and floating in our bubble to see our friends and family and do our learning, and that is how I travel through outer space to you, in a bubble of stardust. Ooh, that sounds cool, Mr. Bugaloo. I wonder, kids, if you too could imagine a bubble around you. Oh, yes, let's do that. All right, let's imagine a bubble. Stretch. Take in a breath. What colour's your bubble? Cool. And what colour's your bubble? Yeah. And hey, you over there. What is in your bubble? What's some cool things you've got in there? Awesome. I like your bubble. And what's in yours too? Oh, yes. And how does it smell? And how does it taste? Oh, yes. And yours is rainbow with unicorns? I love that. Very good. So, I wonder how we can use that here at us at school. Oh, they could use the bubble to help get happy and then focus on work. Oh, to help work. Yes, and maybe some friends are sad, or if they're sad, they can use the bubble and then talk to a friend, because helping someone else will make them even happier. Oh, yes. Does helping other people make you happy? Yes. And you? Oh, you like to help people too. I can see. You're so kind to your friend. Oh, wow. Oh, look, kids, Mr. Bugaloo gets tired, and sometimes he has to fly back to outer space, and I also have to go and do some more work. But I'm looking forward to hearing how you might be able to use your bubbles in the playground and in the classroom, and I'm sure you're all going to get really good marks at school, learn to read and write and do lots of fun things. So we'll go away now and see you later. Bye-bye. Do. Sure you can imagine Mr. Bugaloo was very well received at the school. The kids love a little puppet, and didn't even seem to care that I'm not very good ventriloquist. So The only problem with Mr. Bugaloo was that I had to put him in a box and put him away because everyone wanted to see him all the time. So that's why I would always add into the story at the end that Mr. Bugaloo sometimes goes home to his house in outer space so that we could get other work done. Now, I've already talked about the assessment phase there. In the induction, it's merely pulling out the puppet. They see the puppet and they're like, yeah, we're engaged, we love it. And the matching the metaphor, Mr. Bugaloo is on this weird planet where there's bubbles of emotions floating around that they bounce on. That sounds a bit scary and weird to the kids, but they find a way to be able to achieve that. And we retrieve those resources in the direct work of getting the kids to imagine their own bubble. Then we're linking resources to how they can apply that with one another and in the classroom. I would always do this with the teacher present. And the ending matching the metaphor and reorienting is about saying, hey, I wonder how you can apply that. And I'm busy, but this will be cool. I look forward to hearing about this. And moving on. So it did also in there, one of the other important phases was to normalize the difficulties of emotions and being in different places. There was no saying, oh, well, you just have to leave your parents and get into the classroom and focus, and then you'll forget about it soon enough. No child's going to be happy with that explanation, as we're all well aware. So, there is a handout that has this and some further explanations. And I'd like to demonstrate one further example. This one is implementing dream rescripting or nightmare completion, whatever you'd like to call this evidence-based practice. It's a brilliant treatment for helping people to cope with trauma. Nearly everyone who has trauma, child or adult, even if that trauma is, I cut my leg on some shells and some rocks when I slipped off the wharf. We all have some traumas. And some of these traumas, like slipping off a wharf, can eventually, through the context of other experiences in life, manifest into lifelong struggles, like fear of water. Let's hope that doesn't happen, but hey, we'll be watching out for that. So, if a client were to present having fierce nightmares that are disturbing their sleep constantly, we know that that sleep disturbance disrupts their mood by at least 30% and reduces their function dramatically. So it's a massive perpetuating factor, and we've got to get this sleep sorted under focused psychological strategies as evidence that they can focus and concentrate, just like on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How can you focus on yourself and introspection if you don't feel safe? Also, this process of dreams, if we were to just use, say, some medication, which is certainly helpful and often very necessary, then to block or override this, then we're also missing an opportunity here. So if it's appropriate, we want to do the nightmare rescripting because we're working directly with trauma. In the way the brain works, inside here, we have the hippocampus and the basal ganglia structure. My brain! So that circular part in the center there, not the part that fell out, but the place where it fell to, is called the hippocampus. And it stores our memories from the day in sequential order. Morning, breakfast, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner time. It stores those memories up, and then during dreams, about every 20 minutes, we can see on neural imaging studies that it takes those memories and relates them to the rest of the mind, backwards and forwards through somewhat random associations, to try and figure out where they are stored in long-term memory. Then If something has a high emotional content, it can disturb the sleep. It can activate the fight or flight system, wake the person up, and that dream isn't processed or stored in memory in an appropriate way. In fact, it's dropped back into the hippocampus to be reprocessed again the next night. This is where the processing factory metaphor comes in, where it's saying that these memories are going through like on a conveyor belt and they need to be sorted into where they're supposed to go in the dream. Though, if these dreams are too vivid and scary, then it just goes back to the start of the conveyor belt. We need something to guide it through desensitization in EMDR and CBT, and then reprocess to allow that if it comes something similar comes again, we have the capacity to deal with that. The intervention and the relapse prevention, the applying that, the linking resources and ending metaphor through the direct work of their own resources. So, a lot of people see those two things and go, wow, here's Erikson and his metaphors, and here's this new evidence-based practice. How do I integrate those two things without doing this mansplaining of CBT psychoeducation like I've just done for argument's purposes? I could be saying to the client that doing that explanation and then saying, so now the intervention is each time you have a dream, that's exciting. Let's finish that off. Let's imagine if you had a dream about your children being harmed, that you would then pick up a stick and the person that was harming them would be an Easter bunny and you'd whack them like a piñata and they'd pop open and this song, wouldn't it be nice if the world was chocolate, would start playing and you'd run off to the ocean and your kids would be so happy, and you can imagine it from the perspective of the children, of the parent, of from the sounds, the sights, the tastes, the touch, the smell, to really engage the person. And then you would encourage that person to do that again. Now, teaching this to a client is easier said than done. They need to relate that to their own experience, and a lot of people might not be as creative, or think they're not, and that's a common limiting factor for many people. So, in implementing this through the Eriksonian method, I could say, after getting the assessment that the client's having struggle with their child who's struggling to sleep, perhaps coming into them multiple times a night saying, I can't sleep, I've had a nightmare, and you'll often hear the parents going, oh, that's terrible, just come in with me and I'll cuddle you and you'll be okay. Or they might go take the child back to the bed and say, take some deep breaths, try to sleep. These things that are logical, but what they're actually doing is reinforcing the negative. So after the assessment phase, I'll match metaphor and say, I'd like to tell you a story about a ship's captain who was teaching others to sail, and there was an enormous storm. This storm threw the boat all about everywhere. And the captain was very practiced with these storms, knowing just how to guide the boat up and over the swells and around, looking at their own kind of compass, so that they weren't disturbed by the electrical activity of the storm. This sailor, this teacher, was able to calm the students over the radio in their boats, explaining to them, you have your compass, this was in the basic training, this is what we do, follow my lead, and we will get through this. In fact, this is fun. You don't get any other occasions where you get to throw your ship around like this. Let's check this out. And the captain went up over a wave and around the corner and expertly guided all of his students away from the rocks, following the lead of the lighthouse back into the safety of the harbour where the swell was reduced. Just like this with your child. Your child comes in a storm. We don't want them to be afraid anymore. We want to guide them and show them that you have the compass. You've been able to deal with many a storm in your life. Even coming here and telling me about this shows how astute you are in being able to work on your own stuff for the sake of your child. You are able to demonstrate to your child how you might end a dream like they're having if there's a wolf or a nasty bully. You could talk about a fun way to complete that, or a unique way to complete that. Maybe something that gives them safety, like the ship's master, or something that teaches them to be responsible, and that gives them the choice of how they do that. I wonder how you'll implement that with your child, what creative, fun stories you'll make up to complete their dreams. Whether you'll go straight for the dream they're already having and end that, or just go on to some other fun imagining. And isn't it really cool how when we're in that dream state and we wake up from that, our brain's in this creative mode where even if we can't handle the dream anymore, we can think about something else fun in a intriguing visualization manner where we link back into like the sounds of the storm, the color and shape of the moment, the vibe of the air, the energy that was there. All those energies from the dream we could also place into a new imagining to soothe and comfort our child and teach them. And I'm sure that as you know your client well enough, you would be able to pick up on other circumstances where they've done just that, to be able to link this metaphor through to the person's resources, and then say, I wonder how this will look when you're able to implement this with your child. How they will respond and be able to put this in place themselves when they have their own compass and learn to read that. So, I hope that's been clear enough to demonstrate the assessment, the induction there, by giving a somewhat extreme or outrageous or passionate story about the swell and the ships, matching the metaphor through to the client. In the area where I work, there's a Navy base, so there's a lot of sailing goes on, and that would be one of the reasons why I've selected a metaphor like this. Retrieving resources from the person's own capacity is a little hard in a generalized example. The direct work of how they can implement that, the fact that they've done so before, linking through to existing resources and demonstrating and ending the matching metaphor, how they'll be able to apply this in their own life with their own child, and reorienting them. That's a really important step at the end of the session. You might go on to talk about some other things for a while to make sure that they're out of the trancy state, making sure you've got the next appointment, the payment, that everything's okay, safety plans are in place. But then the end of the session, they're still in this state, they're still engaged therapeutically. You want to be adding a reminder as one of the last things you say, to be like, I'm really looking forward to hearing how this is going to look when you're able to implement all those skills that you've got there. A little sentence like this that you can potentially find some of your own phrases that you're comfortable with and implement with every session you have to encourage your clients to echo on that metaphor and the training and the experience and capacity they've achieved through that into their own life on a daily basis. I'd love to hear how this works for you in your sessions.